Hello there, YouTube. Lots of injuries to discuss. Up next on Kokomo Friday.
Alcantara, Soroka, you look so good in Boca. Peralta, Manoa, bounce back for Aaron Giolito, Castillo, Yoshida, Masucci,
Happy Kokomo Friday and welcome in to Fantasy Baseball today on March 24th. Frank Stampfl joined by Scott White and Chris Towers. Today on the show, it was an injury-filled Thursday that we'll be recapping. The big one, Rhys Hoskins out for the year with a torn ACL. Raisel Iglesias and Adam Wainwright expected to start the season on the IL. And then we'll get into some players we keep drafting / fading going into a big draft weekend, so hopefully we can help you out there as well. If you're watching us on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you're listening on the audio side, make sure to download, follow, and leave a 5-star review. We really appreciate it. If you missed any of our recent shows, you can always go back and listen on demand. We did a massive prospect preview on yesterday's show with the Welsh, so you can always check that out. Chris, I see you're donning the powder blue and I guess you could call that burgundy Phillies jersey. I have one too. I thought about wearing it, but it's a sad day. Sad day for Phillies Nation.
Yeah, we're all really bummed out. I'm obviously not a Phillies fan, but I'm still bummed out about Rhys Hoskins' injury. It was tough to watch. He went down awkwardly, and there's not really. It's never good when injuries happen, but this is not one where there's like a particularly robust silver lining. I know some people like Derek Hall. I think like he hit the ball really hard and put up decent numbers last year and has decent minor league numbers. He also saw 12 plate appearances against lefties and struck out 7 times. So I think he's almost certainly a platoon-only bat. His OPS against lefties in AAA last year was also under 600. So he is probably a platoon-only bat, someone who in your 15-team leagues can have some utility, but probably isn't going to matter in most 12-team leagues.
All right, well, let's talk about the entire injury and what else might happen because there's kind of rumors swirling all around right now. Following this injury, again, Rhys Hoskins out for the season with a torn ACL, and Derek Hall seems like the likely option to move to first base, but I've seen some rumors of Alec Bohm potentially sliding over to first base, or even saw some rumors about Miguel Sano coming into, I don't know that he would play first base. Maybe he's a DH and Derek Hall plays first, whatever it might be. If Bohm slides over to first, one of Edmundo Sosa or Josh Harrison likely playing third base here. Scott, what is your best guess as of now as to what happens sans Rhys Hoskins?
Oh, I think a few things are going to happen. I think they have some versatility they can take advantage of. Edmundo Sosa, who's had a big spring and who had a strong performance for the Phillies after coming over from the Cardinals last season. I think they like him, and he's shown he can play basically everywhere. He would be an upgrade defensively at third over Bohm, and Bohm would present a nice big target at first base. But if the Phillies do think Bohm is their third baseman of the future, I doubt they just make him their full-time first baseman this year. So it's probably more of a situation where Hall gets a lot of the starts at first base, especially against righties. Maybe Bohm moves over sometimes. They can cycle Castellanos through at DH and let Sosa play more outfield. They can cycle Schwarber through at DH, let Sosa play some outfield. Like they're like, I don't think it's a situation where they just have a stagnant lineup. Yeah. I think they just kind of move everybody around as needed. Chris talked about so Hall and Sosa are both players that I have had interest in like really, really deep leagues. So I don't want to overstate how useful they can be in fantasy because, I'm thinking with my deepest leagues in mind.
Right.
But I do think they're both kind of interesting. And Chris brought up good points about Hall. He's struck out a lot in the past. He's been really bad against lefties in the past. I think the most likely scenario is the one he laid out, but he has had one of the loudest springs of any player in all of baseball. Derek Hall, 5 home runs, 319 batting average, and most significantly 8 strikeouts and 52 plate appearances, which of course is it's happening in spring training, not always against major league pitchers, not always with them attacking hitters the way they normally would during the regular season. But for a guy with little experience whose biggest issue is strikeouts, it's encouraging to see. I'd put Derek Hall on my 40 deep sleepers even before this news because he already had an in with Bryce Harper being hurt, potentially playing a lot of DH. Now with first base open as well. In those deeper leagues, yes, I would go ahead and take a flyer on Derek Hall, but I'd be keeping an eye on him otherwise, just in case some of these gains that he's shown in spring training do become something more. And then Edmundo Sosa, who I mentioned, less interest in him, but if he does gain eligibility everywhere, I think he does have enough pop that he could potentially factor in 15-team roto leagues if he's playing close to every day, which seems like more of a possibility now.
He does have a max exit velo of 115 miles per hour in his career, so at least there is some raw power there. He's not really tapped into it too often at the major league level, but it's an interesting skill set, especially he's very, very fast, 96th percentile in sprint speed. So there's not nothing there. I think if they played the same amount, I would probably prefer Sosa to Hall, but
okay.
I know
I was going the other way there.
I'm probably, I think I'm probably a little more skeptical of Hall than you guys are.
For what it's worth, Sosa has hit 457 with 4 home runs this spring. So also a very loud spring performance. And after coming over from the Phillies last year, he hit 315 in 25 games for whatever that's worth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think both guys are interesting from a deep league perspective. That's Edmundo Sosa and Derek Hall. Sosa, I think, kind of in like a Ha-Sung Kim kind of way, where if you play in a deeper league and you just want someone that you can move around, he has third base and shortstop eligibility on CBS. And then with Derek Hall, I don't want to understate the StatCast numbers last year, a 17% barrel rate. If you lower the qualification to 50 batted ball events, he ranked 7th in baseball in barrel rate, ahead of Shohei Ohtani, Austin Riley, O'Neal Cruz. So
yeah, I mean, the little bit we saw of him, 9 home runs and 142 plate appearances.
Yeah. He could be relevant in like a Jock Peterson kind of way, where even if he doesn't play against lefties, maybe he's just really good against right-handed pitching. That is Derek Hall. What happened if you drafted already and you got Rhys Hoskins on one of your teams? I have him on NL Labor. I have no idea what
he's my NL only first baseman too. He seemed like such a good bet in NL only leagues because he's safe. He's
right.
He's going to
you don't really have to think about it.
Yeah.
I already emailed Steve Gardner and I'm like, what's the best way for me to communicate with the entire league? Because I need to make a trade. I need a first baseman now. Replacements if you've already drafted. In a shallower league, Miguel Vargas, 71% rostered. Tristan Casas, 71%. Rowdy Tellez, 69%. I know there's a lot of points leagues, but it's kind of surprising.
You're in good shape if you're in a shallower league, I guess.
Yeah, right? Will Myers, 45%. Trey Mancini, 40%. And then if you're in a deeper league, I wrote down Brandon Belt, Dom Smith, Carlos Santana.
Yeah. Although it sounds like the Mancinis of the world could be out there in a fairly deep league as well, 41% rostered.
Did you mention Spencer Torkelson?
I did not. I think he's right around 50%.
Yeah, he's ADP is 297.4 at Fantasy Pros. I didn't realize roster rates were available yet. Torkelson's getting good reviews in camp. His production is still pretty middling, but that's worth noting. Big prospect pedigree there. Spencer Steer might be eligible at first base in some spots. He's definitely corner eligible because he's third base, but he played 9 games last year. I know a lot of people aren't really in on Spencer Steer, but he hit 274 with like a 900 OPS in the minors last year, and now he gets to play at Great American Ballpark. So I think Spencer Steer is someone who is already on my late round radar. I've drafted him in the late rounds in a bunch of leagues, and he's someone worth taking a look at.
A couple more deep sleepers at first base. I mentioned Derek Hall was among my 40 deep sleepers. These were the 2 others at first base. Brandon Belt, who has been banged up for a lot of spring training, but there was more hype coming into the exhibition season with him joining Toronto, then moving in the right field fences, him coming back from knee surgery. I still think he could turn in a nice season.
Massive production in 2020 and 2021.
And even if you just need someone kind of crummy to tide you over, there's still a good chance you could pick up Matt Mervis in the hope he gets called up sooner than later. He's the other of the deep sleeper first baseman. I think, like, I've had the thought in that NL only league, well, maybe I could trade for Matt Mervis while he's in the minors now, and then maybe he could come up later. Of course, those are deeper league plays. Again, those first basemen you mentioned in the first group are all much more attractive than any of these other names we've mentioned.
If you just need like a short-term option, Garrett Cooper's going to hit when he plays. His problem is staying healthy. He doesn't have a ton of upside, but like he's had at least a 750 OPS 4 straight years. So Garrett Cooper's a solid enough bat. I don't know what Joey Meneses' roster rate is. He's right around 200 in ADP, but if he's available, you need upside. I think the likeliest outcome is he's not particularly good, but
he's in that same group as Trey Mancini for me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He is up. Nope, we don't have roster rates on a player's page yet. But if you
that's what I noticed the other day.
If you go to roster trends on CBS, then you can go to most rostered and you could find it out that way. I mentioned the name earlier too, but Dom Smith, I think he's homered in back-to-back days here in spring training, and he's going to play, if nothing else, for the...
What is dead may never die.
I will never quit Dominic Smith.
This is a 74% rostered, by the way.
Scott won't quit Alex Kirilloff. I will not quit Dominic Smith. It's not going to happen. Raisel Iglesias is dealing with a low-grade right shoulder, not with just with low-grade shoulder inflammation. He'll be shut down for a week before ramping back up. Manager Brian Snitker said he hopes Iglesias will only require the minimum 15 days on the IL. Scott, are you planning to lower Iglesias in your relief pitcher rankings? And who do you think gets saves in the meantime for Atlanta?
Well, they've pretty much said it's going to be AJ Minter. So thank you to Brian Snitker for making it clear. I have moved Raisel Iglesias down some, mostly because I want to keep myself from going earlier than I have to. I suspect this is the sort of situation where you could get him at a pretty steep discount just because fantasy players tend to freak out about early season IL stints, beginning of season IL stints. And I think this is something that we could stand to model real life front offices about. Like we could model their behavior more with this sort of thing. Cause I think the way MLB people look at it is, let's go ahead and put him on the IL to start the year. It's a long season. Make sure he's healthy for the majority of it. No big deal. But we see them put him on the IL and we start freaking out. He's going to miss half the season. And no, it's a long season. It certainly, if you play in a league with IL spots, it just gives you an opportunity to pick up another player in the meantime during the time of year when roster space is most valuable because you don't know who's good yet. That's still being sorted out. So you'd like to have more bites at the apple. So back to Iglesias, I moved him down, but I moved him down within the same tier at relief pitcher. So I moved him behind. So I had him pretty high already. I moved him behind Jordan Romano, Felix Bautista, Ryan Presley, and Kenley Jansen, but he's still in that same tier with them for me.
Yeah, I moved him behind those guys, Camilo Doval and David Bednar. So just basically at the bottom of the guys we're pretty confident are their team's closers. Not too far down. And it's worth noting he had shoulder issues in 2015 and 2016, went on the IL in both of those years, missed about a month each time. Hasn't had any issues since. So I don't think it's too big of a concern, but obviously, anytime you have shoulder issues with a pitcher, it's a little bit of a red flag for sure.
The other name to go on the IL or likely to start on the IL is Adam Wainwright. He's dealing with a groin strain. Apparently, Jake Woodford is expected to take his place in the rotation, and Woodford threw 48 innings last season, mostly in relief, and he had a 2.23 ERA, 1.12 whip, 4.5 K per nine. Not a typo. 4.5 K per nine with a 52% ground ball rate. He's looked really good this spring for what it's worth. Over a strikeout per inning. his opponent quality, 8.3 according to Baseball Reference. That's somewhere between AAA and Major League Baseball. So it's not like he's just going up against a bunch of scrubby players. Scott, any interest in Jake Woodford? This is a very deep league play, but he pitches for a good team with a good defense behind him.
Yeah, I mean, he did catch my eye this spring, particularly with his last start, 7 strikeouts and 5 shutout innings. And he's basically been right at a strikeout per inning this spring with a lot of innings. But obviously I didn't have much reason to think anything of it. 26-year-old who doesn't have a rotation spot. Why should I care what he's doing this spring? Now have to take a closer look. Yeah, I could still come up probably with 130 starting pitchers I'd rather have than him. So, if he goes and dominates his first time out, maybe I'll rethink it. But for now, I think it's pretty safe to ignore Jake Woodford.
All right, we had some good injury news as Yordan Alvarez made his spring debut on Thursday. He led off for the team. He was playing left field. The leadoff thing is interesting. Like, I don't think he's going to lead off, but I don't know. Maybe they just wanted to get him, more.
I would guess that's what it is.
Yeah. He went 0 for 3 with a strikeout, but Chris, obviously this is good news. Let's monitor the next couple of days, see how his hand bounces back and all that kind of stuff. But, with this, are you moving Alvarez back into the middle of the first round?
Yeah, that's pretty much where I've been once the reports started indicating that he would be returning. He's in the 7 to 9 range, I'm pretty sure. 8 in roto, 6 in head-to-head still. So, yeah, I'm back on board.
All right, good news for Yordan Alvarez. Let's take an early break, and when we get back, players we keep drafting, players we keep fading here on Fantasy Baseball Today.
Follow the path to passion, hope, and history. A tradition unlike any other. The Masters on CBS.
Fantasy Baseball Today is a finalist in the baseball category for the Sports Podcast Awards. We're going up against some big names, and it is a voting system, which means we need your help. You can scan the QR code in the top right corner if you're watching on YouTube, or find the link in the podcast or YouTube description. You'll need to quickly create an account on their site. It's annoying. Takes like less than a minute. It's fine. And then vote for FBT. Voting ends April 6th. We really do appreciate it. Let's get into players we keep drafting and fading. I think this is a little bit different than our favorite targets from last week, because you don't always wind up with your favorite targets. It's like, who are you actually drafting most? And we'll start off with catcher. We'll start off with Scott. Who are you drafting?
We're going position by position. Who am I actually drafting most at catcher? So I actually wrote about this subject just last night, the 25 players I can't stop drafting. And I was kind of surprised that I put together 11 teams at the time I wrote this. Now I'm up to 12. I just did another draft, put together another team before this. But at the time, with the 11 teams, there were only 3 players that were represented on more than 3 of my teams. So there hasn't been as much repetition as I feel like there usually is with me putting together my teams. However, I did feature one catcher in the article, and that catcher is Salvador Perez. Especially like drafting him in categories leagues, less so in points leagues. Points leagues, I gravitate more toward the good plate discipline guys like Adley Rutschman and Alejandro Kirk. But in categories leagues and roto leagues, I do think Salvador Perez is a singularity at the position. I think he showed it. Obviously his numbers were dragged down by playing through a torn thumb ligament for as long as he did. But when he did finally have surgery to correct it, he came back for nearly 60 games, and his 162 game pace in those 57 games, I believe it was 34 homers and 119 RBI. So not, it wasn't 48 homers like he hit in 2021, but how many catchers are even going to hit 30 home runs? I still think Salvador Perez is the best bet at the position to do that, to lead the position in home runs, and far and away to lead the position in RBI. I don't think there's another catcher with a realistic chance at 100 RBI. Most of the ones we think of as good aren't even going to have 80 RBI. So, I love drafting Salvador Perez, especially since he tends to go 3 rounds later this year than he did last year. I think he is a special fit in that catcher spot in those categories formats specifically.
Chris, who is the catcher that you keep drafting this season?
if it's not Salvador Perez, and I think it probably is, I haven't done this exercise yet, but if it's not Salvador Perez, it's probably Alejandro Kirk. I have them back to back in my rankings. And Alejandro Kirk, it kind of mostly just comes down to, okay, it's like the 60 to 80 range right now. What do I need? Do I need batting average or do I need power? If I need batting average, I'll go with Kirk. If I need power, I'll go with Salvador Perez. Now, if I need batting average, I'm probably waiting a little longer to take Kirk than I would take Perez. You know, he's often around 100, if anything. So I do prefer Salvador Perez. I make him more of a priority, but, you know, it kind of depends on team need. But it's those two guys for sure.
Chris, I don't think you were on the podcast. We did a mailbag earlier in the offseason where somebody emailed in something about a small, beefy baseball boy. I don't know that those exist, but if they did, I think it would probably be Alejandro Kirk because he's like,
yeah, he's definitely
him to a T.
I mean, like Rowdy Tellez, Dan Vogelbach, and Alejandro Kirk all kind of just have the same body type.
Yeah,
like the same mass and density. It's just like the volume is slightly different. Alejandro Kirk's certainly the densest of those beefy baseball boys, but they're all, I think, clearly big beefy baseball boys.
I was watching Gene Segura at third base for the Marlins the other day. Obviously, a shorter guy. It's looking pretty beefy these days.
Surprisingly, yeah. Surprisingly, like not like different type of beefy.
right.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, I'm surprised. He's kind of he's a little thicker than I expected.
Mm-hmm. Still gets around though. I mean, the guy can run a little bit. So hopefully that doesn't slow him down too much. Gene Segura, small, beefy baseball boy. Catcher that I keep drafting. I really just live in this tier of Wilson Contreras, Alejandro Kirk, MJ Melendez, Sean Murphy. It's like the middle part of the draft. I like the early round catchers, but I just feel like I always need to prioritize something else at that point. It's been Sean Murphy. I mean, he is the one that I target. He is the one that I have the most. And if Sean Murphy has a bad first season in Atlanta, then I'm probably going to have a bad season in fantasy because I have a lot of Sean Murphy, 820 OPS in his career outside of Oakland Coliseum, obviously joining a fantastic lineup. Plate discipline was much better last year. Big things coming, hopefully, for Sean Murphy. What about our catcher fade, someone that we keep avoiding at the position? Scott, is there anyone that stands out?
Yes, I'm sure there is. Why don't you go to Chris first so I can pick it out? I didn't pick him out ahead of time.
Chris, you have one? If not, I'm ready to go.
Yeah, there's not really a specific catcher I'm avoiding. Like I never draft Wilson Contreras, but that's not really an avoiding situation. It's just there are different things I want at that point in the draft. So I don't think I'm in on Sean Murphy. I'm more skeptical of the gains that he made than you guys are.
Come on, Chris.
Like the comp is obvious a little bit, but it feels a little like Matt Olson, where he made this huge jump his last season in Oakland, especially with the plate discipline. And then everyone's like, well, this is who he is now. And it's like, let's calm down. It's a small sample size. Moving to a new league, guys often struggle in that context. I think he's more of a guy than you guys do, but I'm not specifically avoiding him. I just haven't drafted him yet.
So I mean, I understand what you're saying with the Matt Olson comp, and it may play out that way with Sean Murphy's strikeout rate regressing again. Unlike Olson, he didn't have much of a major league track record prior to last year, and it was really the June of last year when Sean Murphy took the leap with the strikeout rate, and he went to being about a 16% strikeout guy from that point forward, which was very much in line with his minor league numbers. Like, he was a low strikeout guy in the minors, and then breaking into the league, he became more of a high strikeout guy. So looking at it, like that's why I think it's a little more likely to sustain in Sean Murphy's case, just comparing it to his minor league track record. But for strikeout rate specifically, comparing major and minor league track record is a difficult and you know, it doesn't always play out like you think it's going to.
The catcher that I keep avoiding is Cal Raleigh. He's going to hit home runs. I think with his skill set, he hits a lot of fly balls. His barrel rate was amazing last year. He also strikes out a ton. And with those fly balls, he's going to have a lower BABIP. So if you need a 220 batting average and 20 to 25 home runs at that point in the draft from your catcher position, go for it. But it's just something I typically am not targeting. Scott, a catcher you're avoiding.
I'm going to say MJ Melendez. I haven't drafted him once. Everybody else seems to like him more than I do. I think his ADP is higher than both William Contreras and Sean Murphy. I rank him a tier below those guys because he had a bad batting average last year. He did some things well. He walked a lot. He homered at a good enough rate to compare with those two, but those two don't have to really even get better. I mean, we think Sean Murphy maybe can get better. You and I do, Frank. He doesn't really have to justify his costs. Between those three, William Contreras, Sean Murphy, MJ Melendez has to get better.
The thing that does intrigue me about Melendez is just he's one of those guys who, like, his value is not linear. You know, it's not like if he gets better, if he gets a little better, he'll be a little better for fantasy. If he gets a little better, he's going to be a lot better for fantasy because he has that playing time edge at catcher because he's going to play so much at the outfield or DH.
I don't think that edge is what it used to be, though, with all the NL teams having the DH spot now. I mean, we saw Will Smith play a lot of DH last year.
I don't know that he'll do it as much with JD Martinez there, but I get your point. I don't know that Sean Murphy will play DH because
that's Sean Murphy's.
They have Travis d'Arnaud as well.
Sean Murphy's the one that I'm worried about because he had 616 plate appearances last year, which is so hard to do at the catcher position. And like, if Marcell Ozuna is just a wash, then maybe it'll happen. But like, I worry about the counting stats for Sean Murphy. Whereas Melendez, like, if he's pretty good, he's going to play 150 games. I feel very confident in that. So that's the one thing where, like, that's one thing I like to do is try to identify places where guys can not just outperform their ADP, but really, really jump ahead of where they're being drafted. And Melendez is one guy where I initially had him as a bust. And I do think the likeliest outcome is he kind of disappoints at his price. And when it was a top 100 price, like it was in NFC drafts, I was out. But I took him yesterday. I can't remember. I think it was like outside the top 120 or something. And at that point, I can't really complain about it.
Let's move over to first base and let's make it a little bit quicker. As much as I would love to talk for days about all these players, we got a lot of positions to get to. Let's go to Chris. We'll start with you this time. A first baseman that you keep drafting.
Christian Walker is probably the guy. I've got him as a top 100 player, and he goes well outside the top 100. So he's an easy pick if I don't take a first baseman early. I love to end up with Christian Walker. He had the breakout season. He actually has a decent track record. I think it's underrated. His last 4 seasons, really only one of them was bad. And Statcast numbers even better than his actual numbers. So there is, I think, room for improvement for Christian Walker.
His numbers were exactly the same as Matt Olson's last year. Mm-hmm. Not literally, but close enough, right? So, like, you do the player A, player B comp, and oh wow, Olson.
They're probably the same age, I would guess.
Drafted 70 spots apart on average. And look, I'd rather have Olson than Walker, but like that, having Walker available with those Olson-like numbers last year makes it easy to pass up first base early.
Walker is 31, by the way. He's
I did have Walker on that list of 25 players I keep drafting. But since you took him, I'll go with the other first baseman I have on here. And this is kind of a strange one, but in the right circumstances, I've wound up with a couple shares of Paul Goldschmidt. And like, how did that happen? Because, I've talked a lot about how that's one of the positions that affords you the opportunity to wait. Well, part of the reason it happened is because when I pick at the start of drafts, obviously a late round 2 pick, if all the elite third basemen go, including Arenado, I still have to take someone at the turn. And usually that's someone who falls as Goldschmidt. The other time I got him was actually in a head-to-head points salary cap draft, an auction basically. And I specifically targeted Goldschmidt because in that format, head-to-head points, he and Freddie Freeman were far and away the best first baseman. Points per game, they were both above 3.7. Next closest was Pete Alonso, 3.49. And then after that, Vladimir Guerrero, 3.20. So Freeman and Goldschmidt way ahead of everybody else. Everybody knows to invest a lot in Freeman. But Goldschmidt, by comparison, can be a relative bargain. So when you're not confined by turn order and having to stress about position scarcity that way, you can allocate dollars to take care of it even while investing big at first base. I think it's a good idea to go ahead and do that in Goldschmidt, especially in those points leagues.
The first baseman that I keep drafting is actually Anthony Rizzo. I want Rowdy Tellez, but usually I wait at first base. Someone likes Rowdy Tellez more than I do, or maybe I just, play chicken a little bit too long and I wind up missing out on Rowdy Tellez. But if I do miss out, I usually wind up pivoting and I get Anthony Rizzo. I know the back injury recently too. That's not going away. He's probably going to miss 20 to 30 games at some point this season. But no one seems to want him. I got him for $3 in my Tout Wars head-to-head points salary cap draft. I mean, in that format specifically for $3, that's really, really cheap. So just going to keep taking the discount on Anthony Rizzo. The first baseman that I fade most often is CJ Cron. And much like Rizzo, also dealing with a back injury, a little bit older, faded in the second half last year too. Terrible numbers on the road. So really just a player you want to use at home, and it's kind of hard to time that up. So CJ Cron is someone that I've been fading. Scott, how about you at first base?
Yeah, I mean, that's who I was going to say. I have yet to draft Matt Olson at his cost. I'm not against drafting Matt Olson. It's just he goes in the top 40, and I have much higher priorities than a first baseman at that point in the draft. Plus, I mentioned the Christian Walker thing. It's actually CJ Cron's probably the most truthful answer to the question, because like I have let him go stay on the board well beyond his ADP, and I just curl my lip and
I mean, he was there
try to
after
talk myself into
200
taking him
in the points league draft we did earlier this week.
Yeah, obviously points league drafts are kind of a special situation where it's easier to do that, but like I don't know, maybe it'll look stupid in the long run. I just have a really bad feeling about CJ Cron, and can't convince myself to take him when he's there.
Chris, a first baseman that you are fading.
Yeah, it's going to seem like another personal attack on Frank, but it's Nate Lowe. The biggest difference between Nate Lowe in 2021 and 2022 was just that he was a much more aggressive hitter. His swing rate overall jumped from 44.7% to 52.2%. Despite that, his zone rate actually went up. And maybe it was just he was swinging at the right pitches and pitchers had to attack him. His chase rate jumped 7 percentage points as well. So I feel like pitchers didn't adjust. They're going to adjust this year, and we'll see what it looks like. But we have a decent enough track record of Nate Lowe being pretty boring before last season that I don't buy it.
I think maybe I drafted him in one mock draft, but in real drafts, I don't have a single share of Nate Lowe. I mean, I liked him a lot when he was going outside the top 300 in years past, but
yeah,
now that he's around 100 and closer to guys like Vinny Pasquantino and Jose Abreu, I like him, but I don't like him enough to usually target him in that range.
Yeah.
Let's get into some news and notes before we talk about other positions. And we'll start with Kyle Tucker, who hopes to return to spring training on Sunday and expects to be ready for opening day. He tweaked his right ankle last weekend. Carlos Rodon threw a 15-pitch bullpen session on Thursday. It was his first time on the mound, and he only threw fastballs in this one. They said, let's see how he responds, and then maybe next time out, he'll mix in some breaking pitches. Obviously, still kind of working his way back from the forearm.
The good news is he throws the fastball 80% of the time anyway, so he doesn't really need to get the sliders in.
That's not actually true, though.
No, he actually does throw his fastball. Last year, it was like 80%. It was. I'm pretty sure that's right. He had like one of, if not the highest fastball rate in baseball.
I think it was like 60%, because 80% sounds like Freddie Peralta from 5 years ago.
Last year, his fastball rate was not coming up on baseballsavant.com. It's very useful.
It's not loading for me either. 61%. So yeah,
that's still really high.
It is a lot. Dave Roberts said that Tony Gonsolin will spend, quote, a few weeks on the IL as he rehabs the ankle injury. Looks like Ryan Pepio will be the fifth starter in the meantime for the Dodgers. Garrett Whitlock and Brian Bayo will both begin the season on the 10-day IL. It's mostly to continue building up their workloads so that they can get into the rotation. Garrett Whitlock does have SPARP eligibility for those playing in head-to-head points leagues. Brandon Nimmo got 5 plate appearances in a minor league game on Thursday. He hit a triple and ran the bases with no issue. He's been dealing with knee and ankle sprains. Nico Horner was scratched Thursday due to left biceps tightness. Hopefully nothing too severe. Again, we're within a week from opening day now, so don't really like to see it that late into spring training. Both Jason Hayward and James Outman will be on the Dodgers opening day roster. And Outman is kind of interesting. Last year in the minors, he hit .294 with 31 homers, 13 steals, and that came between AA and AAA. He was older for the level, turned 25 last July. Scott, I'm kind of interested here. If James Outman is playing on the strong side of a platoon, either in center or left field, somewhere for the Dodgers, I'm kind of interested. What do you think?
Yeah, he's kind of interesting. I feel like I want to see the way the playing time shakes out. Like if I have to choose between not Josh Outman, what is it?
James Outman?
James Outman, yeah. Josh Outman, former pitcher. If I have to choose between James Outman and Derek Hall today in one of those deeper roto leagues, I'm probably going to pick up Hall because I'm more confident how the Phillies are going to use him. But Outman is someone to monitor.
Would you take Outman or Edmundo Sosa?
Outman.
Okay. Apparently, Yuli Gurriel and Jose Iglesias are not locked to make the Marlins roster. And then a report came out that both Brian De La Cruz and Jesus Sanchez will both be on the opening day roster for the Marlins.
Back, baby.
Let's go.
Get those Brian De La Cruz shares.
Some performances from Thursday worth mentioning. Hayden Wesneski, another great outing. 5 innings pitched, 1 unearned run with 5 strikeouts against the D-backs. I had a Cubs fan tweet at me thanking the Yankees for trading Wesneski to the Cubs. You're welcome on behalf of the Yankees, I guess. Graham Ashcraft struck out 10 against the Padres B team on Wednesday night and mentioned a new slider grip after the game. He said this is the best the slider has ever felt for him. Team context, I get it. Cincinnati Reds, they're very bad. This is somebody who throws a 97 mile per hour cutter on average. And now he has a new slider grip. In the way that I'm kind of interested in James Outman, I'm kind of interested in Graham Ashcraft.
So there were 3 starting pitchers that in my latest rankings update, I moved into the top 100, which isn't saying a ton. Obviously, not every league goes 100 deep into the starting pitcher pool, but one of them's Josiah Gray, who we talked about earlier in the week, with his new cutter and hopefully using his fastball less, which is going to be the key to him succeeding. One is Mitch Keller, who also added a cutter and looked good this spring. And one is Graham Ashcraft, who you'll remember at times I was talking up last year too. Like, guy regularly hits triple digits, and the strikeouts weren't there as a rookie last season, but he got his share in the minors and 25 and 17 and a third innings this spring with that new slider. Graham Ashcraft might be a very late breaking sleeper here.
What is dead may never die. Yusei Kikuchi, 5 shutout innings with 9 strikeouts against a lot of the Twins regulars here on Thursday.
Oh, you know what? It was 4 because I moved Yusei Kikuchi up the highest of any of them.
I'm getting real between Yusei Kikuchi, Mitch Keller is having a phenomenal spring. He's one of 2 pitchers with 20 plus strikeouts and only 1 walk. And he's got 9 pitches now. He's one of those guys. I think he's either adding or reintroducing a cutter. I don't know. I think Mitch Keller throws 8 or 9 pitches now. He's constantly tinkering.
He's basically you, Darvish.
But between Mitch Keller and Yusei Kikuchi, I'm getting real bad flashbacks to
yeah.
Well,
are we getting duped here, Chris? I don't know.
I want to not get hurt.
It kind of reminds me of how, remember 2 springs ago, Trevor Rogers before he was a thing, and Carlos Rodon.
Robbie Ray was another one.
Mm-hmm.
Robbie Ray, exactly. Yeah. Those 3 pitchers 2 springs ago, nobody was on them until the very end of spring training, and they all turned out to be
the
great.
Thing, Tinstap, right? There's no such thing.
Freddie Peralta, I think, was the same thing. All right, go ahead.
There's no such thing as a pitching prospect. That's what we say. But the reality is, there's no such thing as a pitcher. There are 25 pitchers who are legitimately predictable. Let's say 50 pitchers who are legitimately predictable on a year-to-year basis. 25 of them are awesome. 25 of them suck. And everyone else, it's just this wide range of possible outcomes. And everybody's always tweaking, and seems like half the league is a driveline baseball in the offseason. And so, like, we have to open our minds and our hearts to the possibilities that a Mitch Keller breakout could happen, as long as you don't have to pay much for it.
I don't
or
think
anything for it at all.
I don't think that you will have to. Jared Schuster, 6 innings, 2 runs, 2 strikeouts, and 2 walks against a bunch of the Mets starters. I think Dylan Dodd is going on either Friday or Saturday. So that will be the last of the competition. I think it's probably going to be Schuster at this point. After a bad spring debut last week, Nestor Cortez was pretty awesome on Thursday against most of the Cardinals regulars. He went 4 shutout with 7 strikeouts. Kyle Lewis, a name we have not mentioned at all, hit another home run. He's now 11 for 23 with 3 homers and 11 RBI. This is a very deep league special, NL only. Maybe works his way into some playing time. Kyle Lewis with the Diamondbacks. Let's take our last break and then speed on through the rest of what we need to do on Fantasy Baseball today.
Follow the path to passion, hope, and history. A tradition unlike any other. The Masters on CBS.
Players we keep drafting and fading. Let's move into second base. And come on, boys. Let's keep it moving here. Scott, a second baseman. Keep drafting.
I probably should have said this guy first base because that's where he's eligible now. But I legitimately am drafting a lot of Miguel Vargas, who, of course, was the player I love in our Valentine's Day episode. And I still love him for all the same reasons. I think he has I think he predictably, the most predictable thing he's going to do is hit for batting average, but with enough power and speed that you're going to like the complete package. Obviously, in a great lineup, he'll have that second base eligibility, may pick up third base and outfield before all's said and done. So he's just kind of good at everything, and with a really good team. And you can get him really late, and I often do.
Chris, a second baseman you keep drafting.
It was Jorge Polanco, and it may still end up being Jorge Polanco because I think I still have him higher than he's likely to be drafted. But in the two of the 3 drafts I've done since Jose Altuve got hurt, I've drafted him. So I think it might be Jose Altuve. I'm willing, I took him. I've got him ranked inside the top 100, but I took him at like 120. I think the 2 times I've taken him. So I'm fine with that kind of value for him.
Yeah, the same for me, Chris. I mean, I wound up doing a bunch of early drafts this year. The NFBC has this function where you could just type in a player's name on your My Team page, and it'll show you all the leagues. So yesterday, or a couple of days ago, when I heard the Altuve news, I did that, and he popped up on like 4 different teams. It's like, oh my God, I have so much Jose Altuve. So that is the answer. That was before he got hurt. But in deeper leagues, I always wind up with Gene Segura as my middle infielder. In roto leagues, I think he's like a 15-15 kind of guy. Doesn't hurt you kind of player. So I do draft a lot of him. I have him in my NL only labor team as well.
Drafting a lot of Ketel Marte too. Just a little bonus for you there.
I actually have a lot of him too. Yeah. I mean, either him or Gene Segura typically as my middle infielder. They just go so late.
Much rather have Ketel Marte.
I mean, I've still got Ketel Marte ranked in my top 10 at the position. So like I'm not really downgrading him very much at all.
All right, let's move over to our second base fade. I'll kick us off here. It's the batting average guys. Jeff McNeil, Luis Arraez just don't really give you anything else. And even if you play in a points league, right? I'm looking at last year, 2.8 fantasy points per game for Arraez, 2.74 for Jeff McNeil. And that was with them leading their respective leagues in batting average. So I don't really know how it can get much better. I typically just don't target those guys. Chris, we'll go to you first this time. Second base fade.
Andres Jimenez. I think he's probably a good source of batting average, but maybe not a great one. I don't really trust him as a power source. I tend to be skeptical of the 1-year breakouts. Andres Jimenez is that. And I think there's a decent chance he falls back to being like a dozen homers and mediocre counting stats guy.
Scott.
It's Jazz Chisholm. I get the upside, especially now with Altuve hurt. He has as much upside as anyone at second base, but I just think the risks are too great for the cost.
As much upside as any player in fantasy, Scott.
Okay.
Chris looked it up. I think on a per game basis last year, his roto value was second to only Aaron Judge.
Yes, second most valuable player according to the Razzball player rater on a per game basis.
Come on, Scott.
I don't believe you to use the Ron Swanson gif because like
All right.
If you're hitting 250, like, I'm sorry, you're not the second most valuable player in Roto.
I think he was on a 35-30 pace though, which
Sure, but
obviously matters a lot.
yeah,
Anywho, let's move on
not for
to
me.
let's move over to third base. For me, I have a lot of Austin Riley. I think there was like 2 or 3 drafts in a row where I wound up taking him, and I think we would talk before the podcast, Scott, and we'd be like, "Hey, you got Austin Riley? I got Austin Riley too." And did we just become best friends? But if I miss out on those early round guys, I typically fall back on Gunnar Henderson in the middle round. So I think I have 2 or 3 shares of Henderson as well. Scott, how about you? Which early round second baseman are you drafting most?
Third base.
Third base. Yes, correct.
By the way, that was a Ron Burgundy gif. I think I said Ron Swanson. I don't believe you. All right. I am drafting, obviously, a third baseman in round 2, but it hasn't been the same guy very often. I got plenty of Devers, Arenado, Machado, Riley, mixed it up pretty well. So I'm going to surprise you with my pick here. I'm going to go Brandon Drury. Interestingly, because I have him as a bust this year, but
so does everybody.
Exactly. And so it's gotten to a point where his downfall is so widely presumed that his already very low ADP tends to be even lower in leagues with fantasy baseball analysts. Like he falls to like the 230, 250 range. And particularly in those deep roto leagues where you just have to make sure you don't fall behind in the counting stats if somebody's hurt, I think Drury's a great option for that because he's already second and third base eligibility. So very favorable eligibility right off the bat. They've talked about using him some at shortstop in the outfield this year. Could be quadruple eligible sooner than not. And of
I
course,
think he's already triple eligible. He's first base eligible, right?
Not on CBS.
Oh, okay.
I don't think. Double check that. Obviously, the reason people are fading him is because his stats in Cincinnati versus everywhere else last year, he's not in Cincinnati anymore, so we can't count on that. But Angel Stadium's still a good place to hit. He's going to be batting behind all these on-base freaks in the Angels lineup: Taylor Ward, Mike Trout, Ohtani, Anthony Rendon. So he's going to have plenty of RBI opportunities. If he just gets to 80% of last year's power production, I think he'll be a pretty valuable asset still. A 250 hitting, 20 homer, potentially 80, 85 RBI guy with that favorable eligibility very late in drafts.
He is triple eligible, by the way. 27 games.
So he could end up eligible everywhere but catcher before the year's over, which would be
Let's
amazing.
get him catcher eligible too. Why not?
The old school Isaiah Kiner-Falefa back in the days, like
Yeah.
catcher, shortstop, and I don't know, maybe third base. Speaking of third base, Chris, who is the third baseman you keep drafting?
Surprisingly, I feel like it's Nolan Arenado. I feel like anytime I'm not drafting with you guys, I end up taking Nolan Arenado in the second or third round.
That's not for the brand, Chris.
If not him, it's probably Anthony Rendon, although I do have a decent amount of Brandon Drury as well. So, yeah.
All right, let's slide over to our third base fade. I don't have any Brian Hayes, and I was pretty adamant earlier in the offseason that I would not be targeting him, but he has looked pretty good this spring. I've got to point out he's 9 for 30 with 3 home runs. That's like 3 more home runs than he had all of last year. So it seems like he's making a conscious effort to lift the ball, and
he's not getting us much like attention for it as Alec Boehm, but a lot of the same topics of conversation.
Yeah, that's right.
He hits the ball arguably harder than Alec Boehm. He's a much better athlete. And it's a type of profile I tend to like to bet on because he's just such a good baseball player that it's like, I think he'll figure out the hitting part. Like he hits the ball really hard. He makes a lot of contact. He's very fast. He's talking about stealing 30 bases. I need more Brian Hayes.
All right, Scott, a third baseman that you are fading.
So Bobby Witt's the easy answer, but I think it's more just everyone takes him and leaves like the Rafael Devers types to me, and I'm fine with that. So more interesting answer, I'm going to say the Eugenio Suarez, Matt Chapman combo.
Same exact answer. We don't even have to go to me for this one.
Okay. So yeah, just like I just have no interest. I tend to fill my power needs early, and so I don't have to rely on those really flawed profiles that those two hitters present with serious batting average downside.
All right, fair enough. Let's move over to shortstop. Chris, you didn't get to talk for third base fade, so we'll start with you this time. The shortstop you keep drafting.
Fernando Tatis.
Yeah, it has
next.
To. Yep.
Although Bo Bichette quite a bit as well.
Scott?
Let's see who I put here. I guess I'll say Anthony Volpe. Anthony Volpe. It's to mention another popular GIF, Jesse Pinkman saying, "He can't keep getting away with it," because that's how I feel every time people let me get Anthony Volpe outside the top 200. It's
but in this instance, you are him.
I am the one who's getting away with it. Yes, Jesse Pinkman is commenting on my
The one
drafting
who
of Anthony
knocks.
Volpe.
Scott White is the one who knocks. Yes.
Look, the upside is amazing. I think if he wins the job for the Yankees, the floor is pretty high considering his plate discipline and how many bases he's going to steal. And it's stupid that he's this close to winning the job and you can still get him as late as you do. So Volpe is somebody I'm trying to draft everywhere and usually succeeding.
This might surprise some people, but the shortstops that I keep drafting are Carlos Correa, because nobody else wants Carlos Correa. He's kind of that last guy before it takes a pretty big fall off at the position too. So I find myself trying to hit other needs in drafts, and then I just wind up taking Correa. And if I miss out, Javier Baez. I think I had Baez on like 2 or 3 of my like slow draft teams, my deeper leagues that I've done too. And just hoping he bounces back to like 20 to 25 homers and double-digit steals with like a respectable batting average for Javier Baez. The fade, Dansby Swanson, I don't have him anywhere. Probably not going to have him anywhere. Just goes at a point where there's other really interesting shortstops on the board as well. I should have mentioned this for the one I keep drafting. I want it to be Corey Seager, but it feels like a race as soon as the draft starts. Like, who's going to get Corey Seager? I haven't heard anyone say a bad word about Corey Seager this entire offseason. It kind of feels like everybody wants him. So it's just really hard to wind up with him in drafts. Let's go to Chris, the shortstop you keep fading.
Jeremy Pena. I don't get why he's ahead of Carlos Correa. I don't think it makes very much sense. I think a lot of it is just the postseason performance, and I don't think there's any predictive value in that whatsoever. I think he's a decent player who doesn't stand out anywhere, and I don't have any interest in him at that price.
Scott, you are up for a fade at shortstop.
Well, you already said Dansby Swanson, so I'm going to say Xander Bogaerts, though I do have a share of each. But generally speaking, that's the very large tier at shortstop where Carlos Correa and Willy Adames tend to go very late. And so I don't see the reason to bother with Swanson or Bogaerts early in that tier.
All right, let's slide over to outfield. For me, Randy Arozarena in roto leagues, if he's there, typically in the 3rd or 4th round, someone that could give you 20-20, maybe even. I saw some projection systems that were updated, the Bat X, and I think now they have Arozarena for like 35 steals. They worked in the stolen base rates from spring training, and some projections went up. So, I mean, Randy Arozarena is super fast. It wouldn't surprise me if he just steals a bunch of bases this year. And then I usually get 3 of my top 30-ish, and then I wait, and I always get Jesse Winker. It's like Winker, Will Myers, Jorge Soler. I wind up with 1, if not multiple of those, in every one of my 5 outfielder leagues. So, man, if they all stink, kind of like Sean Murphy earlier, I'm just not going to have a good fantasy season this year. I will come back to you. A couple of outfielders that you keep drafting.
Okay, so I went on and on about my rising interest in Corbin Carroll and how much I'm willing to reach for him with the Welsh the other day. So we won't get into that again. Kyle Schwarber, somebody I'd love to draft in round 4 in theory, but it actually hasn't been happening that much. I'm gonna go with the duo of Garrett Mitchell and Jake Fraley, who I like to make my 4th and 5th outfielders in every 5 outfielder roto league, because I think they're going to give me a lot of steals for cheap, and without skimping on the power. I think, we've talked about how Mitchell's swing isn't optimized for power, but what we saw from him in the minors and a little bit in the majors and this spring so far, I think 15 homers is a reasonable expectation to go with 30 to 40 steals.
Chris, multiple outfielders that you keep drafting. You are muted, sir.
Riley Green is the obvious answer to anyone who's listened. I draft him a ton. If it's cheating to say Ronald Acuna, I'll still say him because he's my number one player. So anytime I draft in the top 5 and he's available, I will take Ronald Acuna. And then a little lower down, I end up with a lot of Michael Conforto these days. He's having a very good spring. It obviously doesn't mean anything necessarily, except that he's currently healthy. And the last time we saw a healthy Michael Conforto was pretty dang good. So, yeah.
All right. Yes, Michael Conforto has 4 home runs so far this spring. I think the strikeouts have started to rack up for him. I was looking at his numbers the other day. Yeah, 13 strikeouts to 2 walks in 13 games. So the power has been there. That's nice to see for Conforto. It's his first game action in a while. I guess it's not surprising that he's striking out quite a bit. A couple of fades for me, Michael Harris and Cedric Mullins. We talk a lot about Harris so far this offseason, the ground ball rate being high, the lack of plate discipline, chases a lot of pitches, struggles against left-handed pitching. With all that being said, he almost went 2020 as a rookie. Could very easily make me look dumb and wouldn't surprise me, but just not enough of a track record there. Cedric Mullins last season was getting benched against left-handed pitching in the second half of the season last year. So I just kind of worry about playing time. Like, what happens if he gets off to a slow start? And the Orioles have a lot of prospects coming here soon, too. I don't think that they'll take time away from Cedric Mullins, but maybe against left-handed pitching. That wouldn't surprise me. So I have not been drafting much of him either. Scott, some outfielders you are fading.
Since you brought up Mullins, I keep meaning to use him as a comp for Garrett Mitchell. What I'm expecting for Garrett Mitchell is Cedric Mullins-like numbers. But anyway, fading... Gosh, not surprisingly, Adolis Garcia, Byron Buxton. I haven't shown any interest in rolling the dice on him. Tyler O'Neill, same thing, even though he was great in the WBC, and maybe he'll have a big bounce back. It's not something I've been that motivated to do. Who else? I haven't really been on board with that Cubs duo of Seiya Suzuki and Ian Happ. I think they're both pretty mid if they manage to stay healthy. And I'll leave it at that.
I think I could probably throw Bellinger in that mix as well. I still like Suzuki. We talked about him earlier before he got hurt. So if you can get him at a discount, I do like that. But I haven't wound up with Ian Happ. Bellinger, gosh, who knows when it comes to him. I agree with you on Tyler O'Neill and Buxton. Scott, I don't have a single share of either one of those guys. Chris, outfielders that you are fading.
There aren't a ton that I'm actively out on, but I think Anthony Santander is probably one that I haven't drafted at all. I know power is hard to find, but that's all he gives you. It's such a tough home park. His injury track record is so robust. I have a hard time seeing it with him. And then Mitch Haniger, I haven't drafted at all. Between the injuries, the present injuries specifically, and his advanced age, it feels like there's too many ways for it to go wrong that we're currently seeing.
But Chris, what about everything Santander did in the WBC?
He was awesome. I enjoyed the heck out of his performance for Team Venezuela. That was my number 2 team, but still don't buy it.
Starting pitchers that we keep drafting. Zach Wheeler just keeps falling in drafts, and I know that there were injuries last year. He started off with the shoulder, and then he actually had forearm tendonitis. When he pitched, he was Zach Wheeler. He was really good through 30 extra innings in the postseason, so he got the workload up to around 180. I have no issue taking Zach Wheeler where he's going 4th, sometimes even 5th round. Lance Lynn, my pitching strategy is basically dependent on him. I like getting him as my SP3. Sometimes my SP4. He was awesome once he seemed like he was finally healthy last year. And Jeffrey Springs, I know the price is on the rise. It's a little bit harder to get him now, but
I'm in on Jeffrey Springs now. I don't think I've had a chance to share the quote on the podcast yet. Can I do that?
Yes, you should, because Springs has been amazing so far during spring training. And Scott found an interesting quote the other day.
Yes, I did. So what was my concern about Jeffrey Springs? Just that he was kind of a glorified long reliever last year, rarely going deep enough into starts for those to get enough wins or for those ratios to hold up. But here's what he said after his latest spring start. In the past year, I've been a little bit limited as I make the transition from relief, he was saying. So I want to make 30 plus starts. I want to eat up innings. I want to be a guy who every 5 days goes out there and is going to give you 6 or 7 innings. So that's his stated goal for this year, is exactly the one thing I thought was missing for Jeffrey Springs. And so you combine his what he's aiming to do this year with what he's been doing this spring, and suddenly it's looking pretty attractive to me. So I just got my first share of him in this draft I did tonight, and he's going to be somebody I'm targeting more aggressively here at the end of draft season.
In fairness, I will point out his name is Jeffrey Springs, not Jeffrey Regular Seasons.
Good point. Very good point.
Anywho,
You can't get getting away with it.
Chris, starting pitchers that you keep drafting.
Kevin Gausman, I think, is a borderline ace. I don't really buy the BABIP issues sustaining. He was like top 5 in baseball in FIP last season. I think he's a very, very good pitcher. Joe Musgrove, I think his price got too cheap for the non-seriousness of the injury. Reed Detmers, I probably reach on him in pretty much all of my drafts. I think he's a legitimate, very, very good pitcher now.
Musgrove is a good one too. I wound up with him in Tout Wars for I think $12 or $14. So just too cheap. Only if he misses, one start. Even if he misses 2 starts, I think that's probably too cheap for Joe Musgrove. Scott, you mentioned Springs. Any other names you want to mention? Starting pitchers you keep
drafting?
I
haven't actually drafted much Springs till lately, but the guys I have been drafting a lot, Chris Sale, of course. I don't need to go over that again. But Nestor Cortez, actually, you mentioned his good spring start. It was nice how people were scared away by the hamstring injury. That never seemed like a big deal because it made Cortez that much more affordable. And I think he is one of those pitchers who's perfectly suited for this environment because great control, a lot of fly balls, weak fly balls, though, the kind of fly balls that, especially now that the juice ball's gone, aren't going to turn into home runs. They're just going to be outs. So I think that explains the disparity between his ERA and xFIP last year. Interestingly, his xERA was actually very close to his 2.44 ERA. And with that low walk rate, I think you're looking at definitely a whip standout, probably an ERA standout with more than a strikeout per inning. As somebody who tends to go cheap at starting pitcher, I like targeting guys who I feel secure with what they're going to provide in terms of ERA and whip. I can't get that. I'm not going to get that in the early rounds, obviously. So those mid-round targets have to be able to do that. And Nestor Cortez is perfect for that. Joe Ryan, who I talked about recently, at least is in the same category as far as whip goes. A little more vulnerable with the ERA, but I think he has some upside there, and I think he has some upside in the strikeout department. And then Lance McCullers, who I talked about the other day, just because you can get him so late, stash him away. He's back at the end of April, and he's getting a lot of strikeouts for a big winner. Seems like a pretty good idea. And then, of course, I do legitimately have 3 shares of each of the Mount Rushmore. Miles Michaelis, Merrill Kelly, Tyler Anderson, and Martin Perez. So just going to give them one last shout out here.
Yeah, the Golden Girls.
Very nice. Let's bring it home here. Starting pitcher fades. Chris, a few names.
Julio Urias, I'm worried that defense isn't going to be as good as it's been in the past. He gives you good but not great innings, good but not great strikeout totals. So I'm just a little wary there at his price. Zach Allen, I think there's a lot of risk that's not being priced into him. And Tristan McKenzie is one that I'm not drafting at all. I really hate it. I'm not rooting against him. I love Tristan McKenzie. I think he's really fun. I think he's going to be someone who struggles with ERA. I think home runs are going to be more of an issue than they were last year. And he's again a good but not great strikeout guy. So there are other pitchers I prefer in that range.
Scott, I'm going to steal one of your answers and just go with Jacob deGrom because I have him ranked outside the top 3 rounds, and there's always going to be somebody who wants to take the chance on Jacob deGrom, and it won't be me. Probably won't be you either. Spencer Strider, I have 0 shares. I'm not actively avoiding him. There will always be somebody in the draft that likes Spencer Strider more than I do. So I guess I just hate strikeouts between those two. And then Alek Manoah. I just think there is going to be some regression this year. I don't know how much regression there is going to be. He's a workhorse. He goes deep into his starts. Strikeout rate was pretty unimpressive last year. Now they're pulling the walls in right center field in Toronto. So maybe a few more home runs allowed for Alek Manoah this season as well. I just think he should not be going in the same range as like Kevin Gausman and Luis Castillo and guys like that, who I think are more talented from a strikeout perspective. Scott, a few fades for you.
So I don't have anyone who's drafted before Shane Bieber. Well, I take that back. I do have Sandy. I do have a couple shares of Sandy Alcantara, both times an auction situation. And in Tout Wars, I did get Shane McClanahan. But other than that, unless it's a keeper scenario, I don't have anyone at starting pitcher who's drafted before Shane Bieber. Generally, I'm not fading anyone who's drafted beyond that, though. I'm just kind of happy to take whatever lasts to me. But I haven't had much interest in drafting Blake Snell just because he's too risky with that ERA and whip. Remember, I want guys who I feel like are pretty safe for that. Freddie Peralta, because I have serious questions about if he's going to really take on the workload of a true starting pitcher. And there was a third one here. I'm not seeing it now. Maybe Kodai Senga, just because he's too much of a wild card relative to others who are drafted in the same range.
All right, let's wrap it up with relief pitcher. Let's just do both at the same time. Chris, one reliever that you keep drafting, one that you keep fading.
I mean, honestly, it's probably Emmanuel Clase. It was Edwin Diaz before the injury, so it's just want to get one of those elite relief pitchers so I don't really have to think about the position the rest of the way. And so if there's someone I'm fading, it's probably like Clay Holmes or Yohan Duran or one of those guys who you'll have to pay a lot, and I'm not 100% certain they are going to be the closer all season.
Scott, a reliever that you keep drafting, one that you keep fading.
Kenley Jansen.
Yep.
Just because he's at the end of that tier, though now I guess Raisel Iglesias is for me. Maybe I actually have one more share of Daniel Bard now. So one more share of Bard than Kenley Jansen. Same situation, just the one guy from that tier of relievers that nobody wants, so I can get him a round or two after the rest of the tier goes. And I often do.
All right, the relief pitcher I keep drafting, no surprise. It is the Mountain. Felix Bautista was drafting him earlier before the injury, was drafting him at a discount once he got hurt. Looks like he's good. He struck out 3 in an appearance on Thursday. I think he's going to be fine entering the season. And I think he's really fun to watch too. So I do wind up with a lot of Felix Bautista. The relief pitcher fade, Camilo Doval. Just don't really want to get Gabe Kapler here. I think that he will be the closer to start. I worry about the control. The walks were a real issue last year. 3.99 walks per 9 for Doval. Also gets a lot of ground balls. The Giants defense, I think, is going to be pretty bad this year. So I do worry about that for Doval. They paid Taylor Rogers. I don't know if people know how much. 3 years, $33 million. That's how much you pay a closer. So it just wouldn't surprise me if he starts to work his way into that mix. Maybe it's kind of matchup dependent, but relief pitcher is too much of a headache already. I don't want to start off with one. And in my opinion, Camilo Doval is going to be a headache this season. All right. Well, we did it. We got through every position, going a little bit long here, but it's a big draft weekend. So want to make sure.
I didn't mention who I'm fading.
Oh, what was it?
Ryan Presley.
Why is that?
Ryan Presley I'm fading because he tends to go ahead of Felix Bautista and Kenley Jansen in that same tier. And like his knee's always bothering him. I
think I saw something. He's not expected to throw. Sorry, am I doing the Ryan Presley, Ryan Helsley thing? Did you say Ryan Presley?
Oh, Presley. I said Presley.
Did you mean Helsley?
No, I meant Presley.
Okay. I thought you said Helsley. This is like the third time I've done that this spring.
Yes.
I wasn't paying close enough attention. Ryan Helsley, likely to not throw on back-to-back days this season is a thing I saw. So there you go.
Interesting. And probably a reason to fade him as well based on his ADP. We're going to wrap there for Scott and Chris. I am Frank. Thanks as always for watching and listening Fantasy Baseball today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. We'll be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.